So I'm here today with the authors of The Caregiver Revolution, Patricia Elizabeth and Grant Abrams, and I would like to ask Patricia in particular, what is the Caregiver Revolution?
Well, there's two parts to that question, Ivan, and thanks for asking Grant and I about this subject, because of course it's what we've spent the last, 40 plus years on, something like that. The Caregiver Revolution for me started with the movement that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross exploded in the late 60s and the early 70s. She was an MD, she worked in Chicago, and she was seeing that there was no acknowledgement in the medical profession of the word death as to charting and filling in and responding to family. And she began to take note of what was occurring for the loved ones around the subject of death and dying. And of course, her books are very famous. I had the opportunity to meet her early on in my travels and work, and she said that the impetus of her work had actually started when she and her twins, she was a triplet, when she and her twins went to a concentration camp after it had been opened. This is after the Second World War. And she and her twins went in and they were helping with a group of young people. She was Austrian. And they went into the places where people had been kept. And she said she saw butterflies painted on the walls. You can read this in her autobiography. And the impact of the acknowledgement of there being something besides that horrible existence that they were having, that there was some form of hope or some redemption or something was illustrated to her by these butterflies. And she said, if you watch butterflies, you'll see that being free is only part of their story. So when Grant and I started to work together in this subject of caregiving, it was not just the person who was dying, it was also the people who are looking after him and the people who are around them and all of that context. And the Caregiver Revolution actually came out of the ideas of sharing what was in other fields, meditation, exercise, relaxation, communication techniques, all of these skills directly related to being a good caregiver, but also taking care of the caregiver. So the Caregiver Revolution has two parts. One is the caregiver, and the other one is the one you're caring for and the family. And that's how it got started. I don't know, Grant, you probably want to add in on there.
We also recognized the premise of life goes until the end of life. That there is honestly no difference in caring for somebody who has an illness when they're 58 as comparing as to somebody who's in their late 90s and facing a terminal illness, because we never know the circumstances of what that person who's 98 is going through. And this, what you said, triggered a story that a woman who had severe Alzheimer's for many, many years, at her deathbed, sat up and instructed each one of her children on exactly what they should do after she passed away, how they should manage the estate. And that story, which was told at a hospice conference, actually formed this book. That honestly is one of the essential building blocks of this book. That being is there the whole way through, and we are in in contact and presence with the being. So thank you for bringing that back to mind.
Thank you for those answers. Very interesting.
But I also wanted to emphasize the practicality of the book and to say that we have, as part of the book, we are developing and even a sheet, which is kind of a caregiver fact sheet, which has 10 steps to recognize as you're becoming a caregiver. So we're going to work a lot more with that in the future. The headings are check for signs of caregiver stuff. This would be something you'd be given checking out of the hospital. You'd be given a double-sided thing. So how do I know that what I'm doing is okay as a caregiver? Check for signs of caregiver stress, get organized, take care of the basics. We have that in the book also. Equipment recommendations. We actually make full equipment recommendation, 2 hand railings on stairs. That comes out of my work as a physical therapist and Pat's work in the death and dying field. Then we have step 4, get help. This lists the agencies that you're going to want to call. Organize your paperwork, get some exercise, do some exercise. And then this gives a relaxation. We have a full relaxation technique detailed on this list. And then
I would like a copy of that.
Yes. Yep. So I will be sending these out. Oh, wait a minute. The last step is have some fun. So that is our last step.
Have some fun.
Have some fun is our last step.
Good. That sounds like a revolution. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. If I can segue here just slightly off, our good friends, Glenn and Lee Perry, authors of that flotation book, they're actually in this stage. Lee is very close to the end of her life, and Glenn is providing most of the care. And they have called in hospice. And what's been very interesting for me to see is what modifications, it's just slight modifications are being suggested by the hospice folks that are making a huge difference. And both Glenn and Lee are very skilled in looking after themselves in general, but the 2 little things that have made a huge difference have been the placement of the bed was in the middle of the living room because of the EMF frequencies that were disturbing her sleep. And they have modified that bed to be, a hospice bed with the back coming up. Mm-hmm. And the placement of it means that the window that she's looking out of is visible to her, whereas the other bed, which was just the, couch futon in the middle of the living room, didn't have a view. So it's now closer to the kitchen and the dining room for Glenn to be able to hear her while he's cooking or making something for her. And she, when she's got her eyes open and is not asleep, is able to look out and see outside. So, 2 tiny little things have made a huge difference.
That's a very good example. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
So, okay, let me ask another question then. You have developed this checklist for a caregiver, let's say, who's leaving the hospital, taking his or her relative or friend home from a hospital event, let's say. What else do you have that you're offering to help caregivers along with this book?
Pat,
go for it.
Yeah, we do have a website,
yes,
which is full of resources. Do you want me to share the screen? And
yeah, yes. Why don't you let us have a look at it?
Okay. And so we'll share that. And this is Caregiver Revolution. The website address is, as you can see at the top, hopefully, thecaregiverwebsite.com. And that's all one word, thecaregiverwebsite.com. We have just a lot of drop-down lists here, and we've been doing this website since 2012, so it's full of information, many, many posts. And we go on, and actually we have one here of Patricia doing a reading. a remarkable text for doing readings in a Christian context. We are trying to cover all traditions to include every religious death and dying paradigm, if we can possibly get them all on the site. And this is interesting, eclectic podcasts. Podcasts are huge now. Ceremony and end of life planning. I mean, I could talk about the website all day, but here it is, the caregiverwebsite.com.
That looks great. Thank you.
And the other thing I love about that website is that the resources lists have all the links so that you can actually get to any other set of resources on the subject from here. So if you were to Google, end of life care, you would not find quite as many opportunities for referencing materials as this one has. That's part of the fabulousness of it. It's like an encyclopedic index, and you can click on that index and find reference to, exercise, Buddhism, prayers, mantras. I mean, just all kinds of things.
Right. We've
It's
tried
fabulous.
to cross-reference everything.
Cross-reference, exactly.
Do you want to say a word about Each Word a Universe, Pat, which is a
the
project?
word Each Word a Universe as a title is the working title, and probably will be slightly modified when we get to it, but it will be the next book that Grant and I do together. And what it has is the testimonies and the memorials of people who have used the services of caregiving, and also who have participated in, what would we call it? Maybe the opportunity to share the experience of looking after a loved one. So these are stories of people whose family members or loved ones have died, and they tell the tale of being the caregiver. And these stories go back to 1982. So it is the use of the Book of the Dead or other scriptures that people use for end of life or afterlife readings. And the Each Word a Universe, yeah, that's a good one. The Each Word a Universe title is that in providing material for this book, we opened it up to not just being experiences that were the end of life care, but also after end of life. So Each Word a Universe will have, I think we're at 22 or 30 experiences of folks that have written in and given us testimonials over the years.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And here's just, this brought up one thing too, is the end of life celebration, which we do include
Yes.
in the book. We have the end of life celebration chapter in the book, and this is getting more and more popular nowadays. And
we do have all of the modifications during the COVID era.
yes.
So the end of life ceremonies can be non-physical, but just as significant and just as much an opportunity for family to be together.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. In fact, we detailed that in this post right here. Speaking ceremony and end of life planning, right on our first page. These are all resources which now are very contemporary with the COVID, post-COVID.
Yes.
Great. That's great. Thank you very much for adding those things.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tamara, for sending them.
Yes, Tamara's our resource for
She
the
can find
resources.
anything. Yeah. So good.
And